We are back, folks, with our next talk with the title Sending the Angular app into deep offline with Workbox. A little bit of mysterious title, so I'm really curious, but it has to do something with the progressive web apps. Talk by Maxim Salnikov. Maxim is an Oslo-based cloud and web front-end geek. He builds web applications since the end of the last century and shares his extensive experience with many aspects of the web platform by speaking and training developers at the developer events around the world. To introduce Angular to developers, to developer community, Maxim is running his own technical events, including ng Vikings conference, Angular Oslo meetup, and ng community gathering. So everyone, welcome Maxim.
Hello, dear attendees. Hello, Thomas. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. How is it going, Maxim?
Very good. Thanks for asking. How is it going for you?
Oh yeah, very nice. The event is turning out pretty great, so I'm very happy about that. So tell us, what have you been up to like last couple of days or months? What you've been working on, like some new interesting cool stuff with the Workbox, or tell us a little.
Yes. So first, this session will be very first session, I believe, in the whole world about a newest version of Workbox, which is Workbox 6. It was released literally like 3 days ago, and my plan was to run this session based on release candidates or even betas, but we have this in production now, so use it. It's production ready, it's battle tested, so it's really great and provides awesome developer experience. I hope I will inspire you by using this in my session. I'm super happy to continue a PWA topic started by Marta.
You see, folks, like the world first exclusive premiere of the new version of the Workbox here at angularday Verona, so online edition, but still. So we are really looking forward, and let's just like hop right into it.
Yes, let's do this.
Hello folks, let's talk about offline-ready Angular application today. First, let's try to understand what do we exactly mean by saying offline-ready application or offline-ready Angular application, and then we'll use one interesting library to build the one. My name is Maxim Salnikov, I work in Microsoft as a developer engagement lead, and I'm a big fan of developer communities. I run meetups, I run full-scale conferences. I hope you heard at least about one of these called ng Vikings. And also I'm Google developer expert in Angular and web technologies. My Twitter is webmaxru. You are welcome to follow me, and my direct messages are open. I'll be happy to answer your questions about web platform, progressive web apps, Angular. First, let's try to understand why the offline readiness is that important. Well, it's one of the most annoying missing pieces of web as platform. Really, web platform is everywhere. Evergreen browsers on millions, if not billions of the devices. Great JavaScript engines. Excellent tooling, which allows you to write web apps not only in JavaScript, but using transpilation or even WebAssembly. You can use your favorite language to write the application. And of course, all of us, huge community, tens of millions of the developers. But thanks to the history of web, it was not invented as a web application platform, right? So it has this historical dependency on connection status. What is the proper offline-ready web application? We can answer this question by answering the question, what is proper application? For example, the ones we download on our mobile devices or our desktop devices. So these are all applications. We don't even think about connection when we use them, right? So once we installed something, it's there. It's always available. Next, the data it consumes and the data we want to consume in our web application, we want to be very careful with this, and we want to reuse this, and we want to have full control over this. Same with the data which our dear users generate during they are offline. We don't want to let them fill some long form, and when they hit send or post or something like this, to show them server not found. We want to carefully save this data and in the best case, automatically propagated to our APIs when it comes to online. And yeah, we don't want to depend on this jumping back and forth in terms of connection. We want to have resilient mechanisms to not worry that much about this. Plus, we want to have possibility to update our application and data in the background, something that we are used to when we are talking about mobile native apps or desktop native apps. And of course, web platform is equipped by a really great set of APIs, which allows us to use the hardware capabilities of, for example, mobile devices. We definitely want to use this in our offline ready applications. In addition to everything on this list, we don't want to lose the soul of web, its openness, its discoverability, and linkability. So these are unique features of web as an application platform. Okay, let's go through a couple of the points we mentioned. And we start from proper precaching or caching the application itself, or we can call it application shell in our module. And you see on the left hand side there is an animated GIF I created from our demo application for today. And we will build the news application. I call this progressive web news, and this will be sort of a mix of news engine plus personal blog. And what you see on the screen is exactly the application shell, right? So it's UI, it's a frame, you call it everything except the data, and the data will download from our APIs. So this will be very classical single page application. What will it take from us to build this application shell offline ready? First, we have to understand what actually constructs this shell. Set of resources we need to have it displayed. Definitely this will be our index.html, our main JavaScript bundle, our main CSS bundle, maybe a couple of images like this PWA logotype you see on the screen. Okay. Next, we have to put everything into the cache, right? So after all, we have to serve from somewhere during offline mode. Next, we have to set up the mechanism of serving this from cache instead of going to the network, right? And of course, we need to manage the versions. Maybe you've seen the examples when you open the website and you see a dialog popping up, like new version is available. Would you like to refresh the page? This is well-known trade-off when we use pre-cached application shell, and yeah, it's up to you to implement this dialog or not, but I believe in some cases it might improve user experience. So let's have this added to our Angular application. Not a secret at all that for three last points, service worker is taking responsibility, right? And by the way, hereafter, by saying cache, and we will mention this many times, we will mean cache storage. Do not mess this with HTTP cache. This is completely different one. Cache storage is a special kind of storage which exists in all evergreen browsers, and this is a very special one because it's specifically created to store pairs of request and response, HTTP ones. Okay, let's give 1 minute long refresher on what is service worker at all. First, this is JavaScript file. This is JavaScript code, and logically, this is sort of gatekeeper between your application and all outer world. And it can intercept all implicit or explicit HTTP requests from our application, and we decide by the logic in service worker what to do with these requests. We can pass them as is, and we can pass responses as is. Maybe it's not that useful, right? But if we involve the cache into the story, that opens lots of possibilities. How to create your own service worker? Service worker is event-driven worker, so it reacts on some form of events, and we have to set up listeners. So in the fetch listener, we actually serve all the assets from cache or from network. We provide the logic for fallbacks for all these scenarios. of course, in advance, we have to use install and activate to put the resources into the cache and to manage versions. Sounds doable, right? And it is, but it will take some time for you to explore Service Worker API. It will take some time for you to explore HTTP protocol modes, options, methods, edge cases. And after all, this will take some time for you to create even the simple Service Worker if we go not only for super successful scenario, if we go for some real life situations. And you have to think about quite a few options when you build your Service Worker, maybe even more, and still most likely your first Service Worker will fail, and most likely you will spend more time than expected to learn about how to build your own Service Worker. Please understand me correct. I'm not saying that you don't have to build your own Service Worker. I encourage you to build one. But maybe first it's a good idea to try how it works in other libraries to create your own perfect one right after. Let's have a look. What kind of options do we have for Angular to outsource all these three quite non-trivial points? First, we have this great opportunity to use Angular Service Worker. One-liner schematics, ng add Angular/PWA. You have Angular Service Worker plus web app manifest plus a couple of other helpers ready to go. Very simple, very quick, but not extendable at all, and not that flexible. So it works really good for super simple projects, but if you plan to evolve your Service Worker, to evolve your PWA, to evolve your offline ready, I encourage you to try a library called Workbox. Workbox. Just a few days ago, version 6 was released, so it's quite mature library, also created by Googlers, by folks from WebDevRel team, and all community. It's a classic open source project, so you can send your pull requests, you can create issues, you can comment, and you can affect the development of Workbox roadmap. So first, it contains a really great set of the features going completely out of the box. So it sort of returns declarativity in writing Service Workers instead of being very imperative like you have to when you go for manual work. But at the same time, you can keep full control over your own Service Worker. Just because it doesn't generate the Service Worker for you, it can, but we'll go for other option where we extend our own Service Worker by the features of Workbox. Okay, let's understand what will it take from us to set Workbox up for Angular application. First, as I mentioned, we are going for having our own Service Worker. So we'll create the one first. Then we want to enrich it with the information about our Angular application, about distribution version of this application to be precise. And also, we need to apply all modern web techniques to the resulting Service Worker, bundle and compress. You will see why. And of course, we need to inform our Angular application that there is a Service Worker. You have to register this against the origin where it's hosted. Okay, and of course, on every single build, we have to update the information we injected in the Service Worker file and iterate over bundling and compressing. So that's pretty obvious. No more words, let's start. npm install workbox build, you can safely put it into the developer dependencies, and actually this will install not only workbox build module, but via dependencies it will install everything you need for building your own Service Worker. Pretty much all the modules of workbox will be installed by this single command. What's next? You remember that we are going to create our own Service Worker, but for now this very own Service Worker of us will contain only something that we would like to use from Workbox. So everything we have here is related somehow to particular Workbox modules. We start from the application shell, from the proper precaching. And we start from importing corresponding methods we need from corresponding modules of Workbox. Thanks to this, to its modular structure, we literally don't import any unneeded byte of the code. We only can include in our resulting service worker the modules, the methods we really use. And then one, I call it magical method called precache and route does all the dirty job for us by precaching, by managing versions, and by serving assets from the cache. We only need to explain some information about our application to this method, and we'll take care of this on the next slide. For now, we put sort of placeholder called self.wb manifest, which has to be replaced by actual array with the list of the files we want to precache. And also remember that we built single page application here, and we don't want to show offline dyno for the URLs like not mysuperwebsite.com, but mysuperwebsite.com/ something, /about, /catalog, / whatever. This is why we have to just redirect all navigation requests to our index.html. And these 3 lines from Workbox do exactly that trick. Now, time to enrich our service worker by the information about our application. This is why we have to create a small file. I call this Workbox inject.js, and it's file to run using Node, so to run right after the application build. So it's not part of runtime of our application. It's part of our build process. Here we, after all, use module Workbox build, which we installed, and in particular inject manifest method from this. We provide some configuration in addition to obvious parts like where to take service worker and where to put it. You see, in my case, this will be dist/project name, which is ProgWeb News for me, SWJS. On the next slide, we'll see more Angular specific configuration I recommend to use. And after all, after we inject this manifest to the service worker, we will have this placeholder replaced by array with the files. You will see it on one of the next slides. But about the configuration, it's in form of globe. So we literally point to particular files or patterns, what to take into this application shell. We can ignore some files, like in my example, modules for ES5. If we go for differentiated loading, and for example, we can take technical decision not to precache ES5 bundles because it's sort of edge case nowadays, right? So they could be downloaded when needed. Also, you remember that during the build, application Angular adds to some files like main JavaScript bundle, main CSS bundle, custom name, which already includes sort of cache buster, this random string of 20 characters. So why to spend some extra milliseconds on calculating hash for this one? We can avoid this. And also, my personal recommendation to increase the maximum file size to cache, which is 2 megabytes in Workbox by default. Please understand me correctly. I'm not saying that you have to have JavaScript bundle which is more than 2 megs in size, but who knows, all the projects are different. But you can easily go beyond this limit in the development builds. And if you test your offline ready for your developer builds, you might avoid some minutes of searching information why everything goes wrong, why the service worker doesn't cache particular files. Just increase this limit. What will happen with our service worker after running inject manifest? How will this look? Exactly like you see on this slide. You remember that in precaching route we had this placeholder. Now it contains the information about our application and about versions of these files where needed. You see that for the files with hash name in the file name, we just don't calculate revision because this will work even without this one. Almost ready. Almost ready. Why almost? Because service workers cannot use JavaScript modules nowadays. The corresponding proposal or bug is in Chromium bug tracker, so sooner or later we'll get there, but now we have to bundle this. We can use our favorite bundler, for example, Rollup or Webpack or Parcel. I found the best results achieved by Rollup. This is why I use this one. So you have to install Rollup bundler and the 3 plugins we need to do the magic with our service worker. Well, the configuration file for Rollup is quite simple and classic. Input, output. The devil is in details, in plugins. What will we need? We need a resolve plugin to pick proper files, to resolve path. Then we might need to replace string process env node env in Workbox source code to understand which mode do we use now, production or development. And in development mode, it contains quite extensive debug information in console log. So it's really convenient to use development mode for development, but when you go to production, maybe you don't want to pollute the console log with this message, so you just use this simple string replacement. And of course, to keep everything as lean as possible, just apply Terser to uglify, to compress, to mangle. Now, one last step in building. Gather all the steps together. First, we do production build of our Angular application. Then we run Workbox inject script using Node. And after all, we do rollup. C flag here asks rollup to use the configuration file we've seen on the previous screens. Now, on every build, in your dist project name directory, you will see a file called swjs. By the way, do you see the code of this file? No. And you don't have to, because it's not for us, it's for browser. It's minified, uglified, it's ready to go for the browser in its leanest mode. And now we have to register service worker in our application. Which part of your Angular app is good place for this? Well, there are multiple options. I decided for myself to pick the parent component for my application, which in my case called app shell. Why? Because I want to show this message about application was updated, so I need to have an access to really great components from, for example, Angular material library. And in this component, I can do this using dependency injection of corresponding service. It's a material snack bar, but you will not see this on this code example. Just we don't have enough time for explaining how to build this flow, but you will find everything on this URL, aka/Angular Workbox. This is application itself, and also it contains a link to GitHub repo. But the registration itself, we will use handy utility from a module called Workbox window. It's as simple as calling a register method on Workbox object. And this method already includes postponing of the registration until onload event came to your application. So just to make sure that we register service worker as late as possible, not to compete for network, for processor time, for memory. So first things first, service worker is something in form of enhancement, right? So we don't have to have compromises here. Okay, what will we see now in offline mode? If we hit offline and refresh, we will see what we almost want to see, right? Application shell is here, but no data, so you will not see the news and you will not see the post, and you will not see this hamburger icon because I use Google fonts and I use them from Google services. So we also need to set up some runtime caching, both to cache the content we receive from our APIs and some extra resources like, for example, Google Fonts. Also, I use avatars from GrUSP. How to do this? Also, we will use Workbox. We go back to our source service worker and import few more modules, a few more methods from modules, let's say like this. And then we can set the routes and explain which strategy to use for particular route. Let's start from the very conservative one, GrAvatar. Most likely, particular avatar with particular ID will never change. So we can safely put it into the cache and always try to serve it from there. This is why I use the strategy called cache first for particular set of URLs, which I set using regexp in register route method of Workbox. What's next? Next, let's have a look at API caching. And by the way, for this blog, for this demo or blog or news website, maybe that will be more precise definition, I use open source solution called Ghost, and I host it on Azure. So this is why you see azurewebsites.net as a host name. Let's come up with some more strategies. And we have to be very thoughtful in selecting particular strategy for particular part of our application. Let's say for the list of news, I would go for network first, because the list is quite dynamic, right? So you hit refresh, maybe you see something was added on top. This is why I want to try luck with the network connection every single time. If the network is not available, this strategy will fall back to cache. And if JSON with this list was pre-cached, it will show up instead of it. So even like in that case, older information is better than to show nothing. If we talk about the news page, the news detail itself, maybe it's not that often updated. This is why we can go for a bit more conservative strategy called stale while revalidate. What does it mean? That means that we try our luck first in cache, and if we visited particular news detail before, it was pre-cached, and we get JSON from the cache storage. At the same time, we ping this network URL to check maybe something was updated. You know, sometimes folks add some like updates on the news pieces. So for the next time when we hit reload, the new content will be displayed. At the same time, this is good illustration of possible need for broadcast update plugin. And when we know in our service worker that something was updated, we can inform our application itself by setting broadcast message, and then we can maybe show something on the UI like, hey, there is update on this news, maybe folks would like to refresh it, or maybe we can even do it explicitly. I'm not sure it's a good user experience though. So if we list strategies and plugins available in the Workbox out of the box, it's quite an extensive list. Plus, starting from version 6, you have really handy utilities, hooks to build your own strategies, to build your custom plugins. So let's be good developer community. Let's create and open source our own plugins. Also, one technical detail, I would recommend you to use a little hack in service worker lifecycle called client's claim. The point is, if we imagine application loading timeline as this form of timeline, and we are talking here about very first application load when there is no service worker, there is no traces of application on this particular user's device, and we don't want to compromise on speed of showing the information. So we want to fetch and display the data as soon as possible. We want to send these requests to our API points as soon as possible. Of course, you know, in many cases, you have to go for server-side rendering, but here let's limit ourselves by classical SPA, when we download the data itself after application was loaded. At the same time, we would like to postpone the registration of the service worker for as late as possible. I already explained you why. So even after we call client's claim, most likely the fetches already happened, so you will not get the data from your first XHR requests pre-cached, but if you go for client's claim, on the next navigation request, you will have this runtime caching ready to go. You will have caching started. After all, I mentioned, sorry, that we would like to also set Google Fonts up to show the nice icons, in particular if we use Google Font icons. And here I would like to introduce the recent addition to Workbox. It only exists in Workbox version 6, called Workbox Recipes. It's a new module. Actually, this is not a new functionality in the Workbox. This is a set of common practices in the form of very handy methods. So we can set exactly same runtime caching of Google Fonts ourselves using runtime caching from Workbox, but we have to, well, provide some multi-line configuration, maybe register a couple of routes, because Google Fonts they contains both CSS file and then it downloads the font files themselves. Here it's just one liner, and you can even pass 0 parameters. I just want to illustrate that if we want to fine-tune something in this recipe, we can do this. In case of Google Fonts, I use custom cache name. I just want to have this one. In case of runtime caching of the images, I just want to limit it to only 10 images stored in the cache, just not to grow this too much. And the image cache is another Workbox recipe, which allows us to runtime cache pretty much all the images which we ignored in our previous Workbox calls, like in Precaching or in explicit runtime caching. If we forget about all this service worker we just created, if we just want super simple offline fallback in form of one HTML page saying we are sorry, you are offline now. Maybe this could be some JavaScript game like jumping dino or something like this, and maybe also we could also provide some fallback for images. There is another recipe called offline fallback. Also we can provide some configuration like this file names. In that case we just have to pre-cache these files. Of course, this is why we have this pre-cache and route method here again. If we check our demo now, if we go offline and hit refresh, voila, that works exactly like during online. So we have application shell pre-cached, we have runtime caching, we have proper strategies for our list of the news, for our news detail, for our Google Fonts, for our images, including gravatars. You remember that very conservative strategy for gravatars. So everything just works with a few lines of code. What's next? What kind of other APIs are available for improving your user's experience? Tons of them, actually. Everything related to background tasks, native file system, badging, contact picker, notification triggers to set alarms during offline. How to add all this stuff to your service worker when the code is intended to be in your service worker? You remember that we have full control over our service worker. So just add your listeners. For example, for periodic sync API, you have a listener called periodic sync. Just create your own code there. Oh, wait, maybe someone from community will create corresponding plugin for Workbox to have higher level of abstraction, because this will take some time for us to write the code for proper periodic syncing. Or if we talk about background sync plugin to automatically propagate data sent to our APIs during offline mode, we can use corresponding plugin from Workbox. We just apply it to one of the routes. Or maybe we can write our own Workbox plugin to complement this or that part of offline readiness. So there are tons of options, and yeah, Workbox keep the service worker available for us. Let's sum up everything you heard from me today about Workbox is framework agnostic. So it's just the question of, let's say, proper configuration of Angular or React or Vue or your favorite framework, or without framework at all. Just provide proper information to Workbox and just inject the registration code to where it's needed. Workbox contains tons of modules going out of the box. Plus, you can configure these modules, including writing your custom code in form of plugins. You keep full power of having your own service worker, and you apply all modern techniques in web frontend development to keep your service worker file in a good shape and to keep it as small as possible, as performant as possible. Literally, set up, configure, code if needed, and get exactly what you want. The demo I promised, aka.ms/Angular Workbox. You'll find this demo application, which contains also the link to this slide deck and to GitHub repo. And it also hosted on Azure Static Web Apps. If you are looking for reliable and super convenient hosting for your web frontend application, and if you want to have full CI/CD flow completely out of the box, just have a look. Feel free to fork my application and try to host it on Azure Static Web Apps. It's free. The service is in preview, and you can register a free trial Azure account if needed. Thank you very much, and I'm eager on answering your questions.
So thank you very much for the great talk, Maxim. I had to say, like, once I saw like this slide with like what could go wrong, and like it was like listing, and I was like, okay, like don't try this at prod kits, like not a good idea. So that was really like it's not non-trivial thing. It's really non-trivial thing as you demonstrated, and like looks like that this Workbox really helps you like with so many things like out of the box, right? Like it's just like it also like all those APIs which you demonstrated there, like do the images, do the fonts, do the whatever. So it looks really great, I have to say.
That's true. And also, sometimes I have on the slides the screenshot from Twitter when someone tweeted about, okay, I created PWA, I deployed this, now I have to buy another domain because it's something cached there for forever just because something went wrong in the service worker. So using Workbox, you will not get to this situation. But again, exploring service worker API is really interesting for the developers. So yes, use Workbox, but also learn service worker API.
Definitely, like it never hurts like to understand like the underlying technology, and plus, as you said, like you can easily like extend like what is provided with the Workbox, like with your own stuff, so you can attach like your own listeners, and then you kind of need to understand like what's going on and why. So okay, in terms of question, you mentioned there once that like in terms of like the names or something like of the bundles, like oh no, like the file size for the bundles, right? That you can like you need to sometimes bump it because like the development style bundles for Angular could be much larger than 2 megabytes in theory, like for some larger applications, right? And then what came to my mind is like, do you need also like some additional setup? Because sometimes like the bundles which are generated by the production build are quite different from the names which are used during the development. So for example, like the vendor chunk usually is only part of the development build, but not of the production build. So how is this usually like handled in practice?
Well, you set these patterns in syntax of globes in a configuration file for the workbox, and well, it's up to you how you differentiate this setting for production versus build. But I think that in the big picture, it totally makes sense to test all PWA scenarios for your production build. I mean, it could be stage environment for your project in general, but which uses production build, because as you mentioned, the file set can be very different and behaviors could be very different. So, well, if I don't see too much sense to test PWA for your dev build. Sometimes that's useful, and sometimes that might save your time. But in the big picture, I recommend to test all PWA features against your production build.
Thank you for like a very important tip, because this is something which can be very interesting for people who are just getting started and they can come up with these kind of questions. Now they got the answer. So basically what you're saying is, like, even though you have multiple environments, even if you like development, pre-prod, prod, or whatever, it's usually actually the production build of the application which runs in all those environments. So then this kind of like falls out, like this kind of question. Great.
Exactly.
Thanks. Another thing which really took my interest was like there where you shown that like in your shell component, which is like the root component of your shell, you basically like instantiate like this workbox, like you import the workbox and then you provide it like a path, and then it's like that it's kind of like postponed, right? So you said like that this will not happen until your application actually render that component until that like lifecycle hook of Angular. Did I understand that correctly?
In that particular case, this is not about Angular life cycles. This is about general onload event for your application. So this wb.register, it wraps service worker registration into the event called load. And this is not exposed by your Angular application. This is exposed by JavaScript, by your application in general. So this way we make sure that it's not only everything rendered, but also assets were loaded, like for example, so your logotype image, because this is really important to postpone service worker registration for as late as possible. We can actually do step further in this postponing and register service worker not in the component or one of components, but in the main.ts file where you bootstrap your application. So you have the method called bootstrap up or something, and then you can add the promise resolve then and put the code there. But in that case, this will be quite challenging, if not possible at all, if not impossible at all, to use UI pieces. I wanted to show how this prompt saying application was reloaded. So this is why I went for this sort of compromise. I still make sure that everything will be loaded, but I will inject this code straight in my component, maybe a bit earlier. So the code will be invoked a bit earlier than application bootstrap, but still service worker will be registered late enough.
I see. So it's very nice that you spelled it out, like what kind of trade-off you are doing there, again, like to allow people like to make decisions based on their particular like use case and like needs. So that's very nice. Besides that, we have here like that Andrea is saying that she have tried like the Angular service workers out of curiosity, and she was surprised, and now she's like really eager to build more PWAs like than a couple of months ago, and then she loves them. So I guess that's pretty inspirational, which also brings us to that Angular actually has like some support for PWA kind of like out of the box. You can then ng out like Angular PWA or something, which is not exactly the same as Workbox. As you said, like it's more like some basic support, which kind of works for the simpler use cases. So do you know if there is like some initiative or like effort to bring like this Workbox either as a default solution, because as I said, like these APIs like really just look amazing and intuitive, like when I saw it, how we were building it, or maybe it's like something which there is like some like community-based integration where you could just say like ng add Workbox or something like this. Does this exist, or is there a plan to bring something like this?
You literally read my mind. I plan to create and share the schematics to bring Workbox to your Angular application with one-liner. But lack of time, plus I never created schematics before, so this will be quite a learning path for me. If anybody could help me with this, let's just join the forces. And building schematics for adding Workbox to your Angular application is absolutely doable. We just need to find all the best patterns and just sit and make it. So just contact me. I'm super eager to do this.
Sounds amazing, because as it's shown, like it's like just a couple of configs. Of course, you need to like generate it, set it up, but like usually these kind of things can be automated and was demonstrated already like with other libraries which have this kind of support. So this would be really amazing if we just could like empower people like who need like this more advanced functionality or like more customization, as you said, like one-liner, and you are good to go and you can like use all these things. Anyways, so I guess like we have reached the end of our time, and there are no other questions in the chat. Just double check. No. So again, Maxim, thank you very much for amazing talk, and have like a great rest of the day, and see you hopefully next year.
My pleasure. Thank you, folks. Yes, I really want to visit beautiful city of Verona in person. Let's plan this.
Ciao, man.
Cheers.